Next, we have a motion on item 17, the school resource officer memorandum of understanding, please. Second. Dr. Schindler, do you want to introduce this?
Sure, we've been working on this, I'd say for a couple of months now, well, ever since the board really approved the SRO to be included in the budget. It has been reviewed by the police chief, it's been reviewed by the town manager, it's been reviewed by members of the Mass Town Council, Borough Council, and perhaps most importantly, it's been reviewed by our board solicitor as well as the town's board attorney, or attorney, and myself. So that has been the process. It's actually been a very good process. Good suggestions have been made, and now it appears in front of the board. I think I'll stop and see if there are any questions.
Okay, questions or discussion on the motion? Mr. Ballard?
Yeah, I want to know if Dr. Schilder and Mr. Fisher both agree on a couple of things that I was very concerned about the SRO agreement. And that is, one, that the disciplinary process of the East Bend School District has not been subsumed into the SRO position. In other words, he is not a substitute for the school disciplinary process.
I thought that was specifically in the agreement.
I feel that it is specifically in the agreement, Mr. Ballard, so I can answer for myself, I can answer for Mr. Fisher, that I feel very comfortable that that is not only in writing here, but it's been a constant conversation that I've had with the town and the police department. They agree completely that there should be separation, and they do not want this SRO to be disciplinary.
And I'll speak for myself. Look at paragraph 2C. States the SRO is not to be used in the role of school disciplinary. Okay, and goes on.
Second,
Where are you on?
Page 4.
Section 2, paragraph C.
and the second part of the concern is that the SRO is going to be a full-time during school hours resource of the district, and that this is not a replacement for the Emmaus Police Department juvenile officer.
I feel completely comfortable and confident that that is correct, that safety is correct.
Okay? I agree. Thank you.
I think it would have to be, since if the SRO was hurt on the job, the juvenile officer is required to step in as the replacement. So they couldn't eliminate that position and still fulfill that part of that aspect of the contract. That's a fair interpretation.
It was felt, I thought it was important to make sure those things were brought out in public.
All right, other comments or discussion? Dr. Munson?
Well, I had one question about the heart-lung benefit liability. Why is that liability as opposed to the full range of potential liability specifically given to the district in this contract? And what does that mean in practice?
Yeah, let me take a step back and make sure everybody's aware of what the Heart and Lung Act is, just by
I don't.
act. So, yeah. I'm sorry.
I don't know what it is. Yeah.
So you're all familiar with the concept of workers' compensation. That is, if an employee is injured while during the scope of his or her employment, there is insurance coverage that pays that employee during that period of time. Roughly about 2/3 of his or her salary. There is a unique class of individuals, including police officers, who are entitled by reason of the Heart and Lung Act to not only receive workers' compensation coverage, but essentially to receive the difference between what workers' compensation pays and what the employee's base salary is. That's what the Heart and Lung Act comes in and covers. It can only be for a temporary period of time. In other words, if the employee is permanently disabled, heart and lung benefits end. If an employee returns to work, partner-loan benefits end. So what the contract requires of the school district is that if the SRO is injured while performing his or her duties, while acting as the SRO for the school district, then the district will cover that portion, the partner-loan benefits, until that employee is no longer entitled to receive such benefits.
Now, for regular workman's compensation, does the district have an insurance carrier or are we self-insured for that?
The district has its own carrier for that.
And
And nothing will not require the borough to also, the borough will be providing workers' compensation coverage.
right, but so in the instance in which an SRO officer is injured in the performance of their SRO duties and thus this clause of the contract kicks in, will the district will the district's insurance pay for that, or will we pay for that directly out of our pocket?
Since the SRO will not be an employee of the district, then our workers' compensation policy does not cover that. But if there are several other insurance policies, there's general liability insurance, and there's several others that might kick in depending on the circumstances that led to the inability of the person to work. Is that a fair statement?
That is a fair statement, and it's a key thing to understand and remember, the SRO is not, absolutely is not an employee and cannot be an employee of the school district. We do not want to assume that.
And that's clear.
That's real clear.
Well, I have a number of other questions, but they're not related specifically to this, so
I have a question related to this. Can we check with our insurance carriers to make sure that we are covered by what the partner loan requirements are? Can we look to see if our insurance carriers do cover that?
I suspect they're not. I
Can we
suspect
get
they will.
insurance for this?
I don't believe you can.
My experience, I would concur with you, that one, it would not be covered into it. We can look, it would be especially, probably would be very expensive if you could get it. We can look into it.
Okay, Dr. Munson.
So can we get an estimate of sort of what the range of liability might be for that? I mean, because as you said, it's a gap amount, right?
Correct.
So, I mean, you said it's temporary. Is 10 years temporary? I mean, what is the range of potential liability that we're opening ourselves to for that?
I don't know what the proposed salary of the SRO is. I start with that as I can't tell you what the difference is, but think of whatever you believe it might be. Roughly, workers' compensation is roughly 2/3. So it's 1/3 of the difference. Temporary is, it's many a case argued what is considered temporary and what right is there to challenge an employee who really should be classified as permanent versus temporary, and that's where the fight's coming. You're not going to be temporary for 10 years. It requires medical examinations, constant reviews to make sure that it's not anything other than temporary. And the borough has the same interest as the school district does in resolving that issue. Just because the school district is picking up the gap, if you will, the borough is still paying other expenses. So it has the same incentive, in fact, more incentive, to argue that the employee is either permanently disabled or should be returned back to work.
So the other questions I had were more about the scope of the MOU. I guess I have, as I go to exploring Dr. Schall, I have some concerns about how little detail is in the MOU. And that's just on the basis of looking through the materials that the district itself provided us in the discussion of SROs. From the original presentation that the administration gave in April of 2015, one of the key themes that was identified as being really important is the importance of developing a detailed MOU. We were also provided with a bunch of information about what that means in practice, and it includes some things that I had a hard time finding in this MOU. So for example, In terms of best practices, one of the things that we were told from the EDC piece from our 3-ring binder was that the MOU should include the minimum training requirements for the SRO. That dovetails with the presentation that you had made earlier about how SROs have substantially more training than a regular police officer. I didn't see that that was specified what we as a district required in terms of training. It simply said that the district would be involved in the hiring. Is that something I missed? Is that something that, is that an error of omission, or was there an explicit discussion that in the end should not be included?
There wasn't discussion that it shouldn't be included. There has been discussion of what will happen, and the training for the person who becomes the SRO will actually happen in September. There is the registration of the slot for that individual has already been handled by the police department. So the police department are sending the person to SRO training. There's a, Tom, what is the, do you remember the acronym for the whole thing? National?
NASRO, yes, National Association of School Resource Officers.
Right.
Training.
And like I said, there is a session in September that is happening. You know, and Dr. Munson, I appreciate your comments on that, and certainly any MOU could be more detailed, but I will tell you that of the MOUs that I reviewed from in this area and from around the country, and the ones that I've been associated with in my career, this is far more detailed than anything that I've seen. And I've been very pleased with how the police department and the borough has been receptive to that. But one part of it to me, and I think we did talk about this a lot in the presentations, to me the most important part is the person in the job. So, and what I'm pleased with this MOU is that the school district, through the superintendent, has tremendous say in who's going to be here. The hiring, the supervision, and most importantly, at the end of the year, the decision as to whether that person is the right person to be for the job. And the superintendent has, say, control of the year. That's very unique compared to the other MOUs that I've seen. And the police department is fine with that. So I think that really protects the school district and makes sure that we have the right person for the position. So I think it all comes down to the person. You put a lot of details in an MOU, but you got to have the right person who believes in what you believe, not only with discipline, but with connections with students, connections with staff, connections with parents, and so forth. You got to have the right person. And I believe the school district is very well set up to make sure that we have the right person.
Another one of the best practices for MOUs in the information that you provided us calls for specific information in the MOU about how the program, the SRO program in the district will be evaluated. That was another thing that I did not see, and that's especially concerning to me because, as you know, one of my concerns about hiring an SRO officer in the first place was that the data wasn't already in place to know how effective it would be. In 5 years, when we're back here talking about the SRO program, how will we know if, not the individual, but how will we know if the program is effective? And if that is a best practice, should we, in making MOUs, should we not have that in our MOU?
I don't think you should. I don't think you can. I think it's impossible to outline a specific evaluation system.
Well, more importantly, the MOU defines the relationship between the district and the borough and the officer that they provide. The program evaluation is a district-specific function that should not be, because it has nothing to do with the borough. We evaluate the program. We can terminate the program at any time. If we terminate it early, we pay a penalty to the borough for that. But we are in control of whether, if we decide it's an ineffective program, we can terminate it.
Okay, I mean, I guess I'm not an expert in writing MOUs. So I'm relying on the information of best practices that we were given for writing MOUs. And so that's simply why I'm asking, is there's a list of things, and I was sort of comparing our MOU against the list of best practices, and I saw areas that we weren't covering, which is,
But I don't think the best practices can all be woven into an MOU, this is what I'm saying. And you may feel different.
Okay, well, I mean, the best practices list the key components of MOUs. One of them is program and SRO evaluation, clarifying measures of success, evaluation, team composition and scope, and input from stakeholders. We have some of those things in the MOU, but we're missing some key ones.
By the way, I did want to point out, and I should have done this earlier, there's a few typos that I would want the final draft here to incorporate. On page 2, E, second sentence, during this time, the SRO will attend to, and it should say his/her. Instead of his. The next one, page 6, letter R. The SRO will give appropriate aid and professional assistance to law enforcement officers at Lehigh Career and Technical Institute. The word "and" should be in there. The final one is on page 7. Number 2, top, last sentence. If the school administrator determines that there is an articulable and significant threat to the health or safety of a student or other individuals, he or she may disclose information as opposed to it. Those are the 3, I'll call them typos.
So for those who made the amendment and the second, we may accept those as part of your amendment, as a friendly amendment.
And I guess the last thing, and it's really more, it's not a question, it's really more of a comment. I mean, I know I was not in favor of hiring an SRO, but I'm definitely in favor of voting in favor of an MOU that is robust and that meets the requirement that all of the material that we were given said, which is that the way you maximize the benefit of an SRO and minimize the potential downsides of an SRO is with a strong, robust MOU. Now, I'm sure you have looked at more of these than I have, Dr. Schilder, but one that I did look at pretty carefully was the one that you provided to us from Derry, which was from Derry Township. And this really goes to Mr. Ballard's point before. I mean, our MOU, it says in a paragraph that, the SRO will be used for arrests, will not be used as a disciplinarian, but consistent with the best practices for MOUs in the material we're given. The Derry MOU, it outlines specific procedures and specific areas that will and will not be under the purview of the SRO. It seems to me that this is useful to administrators so they know where the SRO is and is not beneficial. It's useful and it seems most fair to the SRO, him or herself, so that they're very clear. Another thing that is not in this MOU that I saw in several others, including the Derry one and including the list of best practices, was standards of evidence for searches and where the SRO stands relative to law enforcement standards versus school standards. And I guess, I don't have any opposition to anything that's in the MOU right now, but I do feel it's incomplete. I understand that there is a strong desire to have the SRO in place before the beginning of the school year, but I'm going to vote against this motion in the hopes that we can ask the administration to put some more of these details in so that we can put our best foot forward in starting the SRO program.
And I will just say that I'm nervous with some of what you're saying, not because of what anything you're saying is incorrect, but I think an MOU, like a word policy, can actually be too tight. Too many words, too many descriptions of what we think we want, but then kind of boxing us in, backing us into a corner. For instance, the description of what an SRO can do and can't do. I'm not so sure I want it that tight. Now, that's just me. If the board wants it that tight, that's fine. I'll be happy to do the best I can and bring you something that you're comfortable with. But I do think MOUs, as board policies, can become too tight, where it restricts our ability to get the work done that needs to be done.
I actually am 100% supportive of that position principle. My point would be, I don't think that that's where we are with this MOU. The examples that you gave us are far more specific. I assume these were not bad examples. The list of best practices for people who have looked at dozens or hundreds of these ask for, it's less about specificity and more about the different domains that are going to come up and providing some guidance on those. And that's, of course, we're not going to enumerate every situation and exactly what will happen. That is too constraining. But I think our district deserves more detail in this MOU.
Ms. Fuller?
Well, I'm reminded that we've been going through our policies, we've taken some text away from policies and put them into procedures, so that we've given more flexibility to policy and have defined the procedures that we wish to proceed with. And that gives the administration flexibility. So could we not do something similar with this? Create, procedures that are agreed to by the administration and by the borough, so that there is a document that defines some of the issues that are concerning the zone, but is not necessarily in the memorandum of understanding.
Dr. Bucker?
Listening to Dr. Munson's discussion, I think I'm being convinced that perhaps I don't see anything wrong with, for example, if we know the SRO is going to go through whatever the standard SRO training is, it's going to happen on this SRO because it's already this SRO, but what if we replace the SRO in 2 years? I think it would be good having it in the MOU to say, at a very minimum, the SRO will achieve whatever we think the minimum training is. If we think this training that we're going to get to this SRO is the minimum level of training, I don't see a problem with that being documented in the MOU. If it's, in fact, it's already agreed to, if the current SRO is going to achieve, gain that training.
So Dr. Bucker, just so you know, to receive the certification as a school resource officer, the state dictates what training they have to go through. And in paragraph 1A on page 2, it does say that the borough has to provide a full-time, fully certified and trained police officer. So I don't think the district should be trying to set the criteria for an SRO since they're defined in law, my personal opinion. And then if the law changes over the next 2 years, what's the controlling document? Is it our contract with the borough? Or is it the law? Well, it's the law that's the controlling document. It controls that situation. So I'm comfortable when it says fully certified.
Actually, that is an illustration of the point. If we believe the minimum training should be the standard SRO training, and the state law were to change to drop down to a lower standard, I would want our MOU to say, yes, that's the state standard now, but our SROs are going to have the standard, which is what we agreed to at the start of the program. So I think that's an argument for including whatever we believe is the minimum training as the minimum training, yes, if the state standard gets higher, we'll have to achieve whatever the state standards become. But I don't see a problem with putting the minimum standards in the document, even if they are coincident with the current state standards now, just to protect them something in the future, were the state to drop their standards for some reason, and we don't think that's justified. We can always renegotiate the agreement in the future to match the lower state standards if we and the Emmaus Police Department feel they're adequate. It's probably never going to come up, but I don't see a problem with that. The other area is,
Could the solicitor clarify what state law sets?
That's not a point of order, that's a discussion issue.
okay. I do agree that the evaluation of the program is an East Penn, entirely within East Penn. Can we get an agreement with the superintendent to propose a policy if it doesn't already fall under our policy, that we will review the program sometime? I know that was an area of concern. I would like to see that review take place at some point in the future. Just obviously not next year. I think it makes sense to give it some time, but I would like to see some attempt, if there's a place in our policies that would be appropriate. I would like to see something added that we will review the program on a basis. I think that was a concern of mine. I lean toward to evaluate, to going ahead with the program, but I do think it's important to have some way of evaluating whether it's productive.
And Mr. Barker, you don't think that that's covered in the MOU on page 2G?
But when we discussed it with Dr. Munson, I was under the impression, I didn't remember that. I was under the impression that people were giving arguments why that shouldn't be included in
I don't think it necessarily should, it needs to be, but if we're involving the borough in the review, then yeah, it has to be in the MOU. If it's just the district doing an evaluation, then it would not be the subject. If we're going to get their input, then yeah, it needs to be. Fairly,
Which it is.
that's where you feel comfortable.
Right.
Okay, perhaps we can see how that goes, and I think, I sort of agree with your statement that the evaluation of the program and its ability to meet the district's needs is a district, regardless of another evaluation. Maybe it's just the same evaluation, but I think we should review it in the district specifically. So if there's, perhaps the mechanism is just that whatever the evaluation is with the Emmaus board, that comes to the, with the Emmaus chief of police or mayor, that the board gets informed of the results of the evaluation.
Well, I think there's two types of evaluation here. There's evaluation of the individual, the person who's performed the duties, which
That's not what I'm interested. I'm in the part of it.
the evaluation of the
success
progress and
program.
success of the program, certainly that's something.
And maybe it's just informing the board of the results, what criteria were used for the evaluation and what the results of the evaluation were. If that could become, this just says that the superintendent and borough perform the evaluation. I think this board, I think we should get a copy of it and have a chance to review it. That wouldn't be the subject of the MOU, but I'm asking if that's something you're comfortable sharing. If not,
Yes.
okay. And finally, just in general, this is on Dr. Munson's specific comment on areas in or out of the SRO's purview. I know one of Mr. Ballard's concerns was sort of the criminalization of disciplinary, and I know he talked about the SRO will not be the disciplinarian for the school, but on reading this, I did get the feeling that well, I don't want to speak for Mr. Ballard, but I sort of had the impression that how the SRO would react to a certain situation, what his how he would interact with a certain situation, when he would get involved and when he wouldn't get involved, would be the subject of the MRU, would be a major component of the MOU. And I see things like if he sees the law being broken, he will treat that. Other things, the administrators will bring up violations of the law, but I don't see in here what, in retrospect, perhaps I was expecting to see was areas that we are saying are not necessarily, it says he won't be the replacement for the school disciplinarian, but are there areas from best practices that we don't want the SRO involved and that should be included in the MOU?
Again, I'm a little worried about how tight that would be.
I'm not saying it has to be.
And would restrict our ability to have the SRO work cooperatively with the administrative team on different issues. But I hear what you're saying.
I'm not asking to go down infraction by infraction, but if there are sort of global areas to sort of make that distinction more clear, I didn't see that, and it was sort of, it was something I picked up on when I read it, but I guess I didn't internalize it enough to be able to verbalize what I was expecting.
I hear that you have a general discomfort that the MOU does not outline in greater detail what the SRO can and cannot do. Is that a fair?
Yes.
So could you give me an example, a concrete example of something where we would need something in our MOU to control the actions of the SRO versus the district?
I guess the concrete example, I don't know if it's a concrete example, but the concern is basically criminalizing minor events. Like, would a fight, if the SRO sees someone, some kid punching another kid, is that battery and is a criminal offense?
So what we heard previously from the administration is whenever that happens, the students involved are currently referred to law enforcement. There isn't an exception in the case of an assault or a fight, which is two-way instead of one-way. They told us before they always refer those to law enforcement. So in
Is there a
essence,
step down? I'm not as familiar with is there a step down in, is there, I guess maybe this is the question then, is there any level that we wouldn't currently call in law enforcement that under these guidelines now, which basically have no limitations on, more or less, if the SRO sees something that we wouldn't want the SRO to be involved because he's not involved, we wouldn't call in law enforcement, but if he witnesses something, he would get involved because he's there.
well, a sworn law enforcement officer has fairly limited prosecutorial discretion. You know, they see a significant crime committed in front of them. Even if it was a police officer, not an SRO, who is visiting the school on an unrelated matter, if he or she witnessed a crime, they would respond.
I'm not talking about crime.
And
We're saying
go
to the
back
level
here.
we wouldn't we wouldn't involve law enforcement now.
If we go back here, the memorandum of understanding specifically states that the SRO is not the disciplinarian. So in every case, the current administrative personnel who are involved in discipline and making the decision on whether or not to refer to law enforcement, I think it's very clear that that will be what continues to happen. Now, if a crime occurs, then of course, in front of the officer will do what the officer needs to do. The officer is bound by the same evidentiary laws that all police officers are sworn to. School administrators have a much lower level of evidentiary requirements for them to conduct a search, for example, with a student's locker. So I don't see anything changing except the SRO would become part of the school community, and we would have the educational aspects as well as having someone on premises for those referrals. Is that different?
I just don't think it's possible to run through all of the different scenarios. And to answer your question, Dr. Proctor, yes, there are times where maybe there's a nuance, maybe there's something that happens, there's a subtlety to the fight that maybe we wouldn't call police. I can't tell you what that would be. I can't come up with a situation. But we always have that discretion. We would still have that discretion. The SRO has that discretion. And I know you're nervous with some of this, but I will do my best. This isn't satisfactory to put more wording in. But I don't believe I'm going to be able to come back with wording that's going to satisfy everybody's nervousness with the new program of this. I will read you one sentence which makes me completely comfortable with this. If the superintendent, page 2, last sentence on that page. The superintendent or the mayor determined that a change in SRO is necessary due to unsatisfactory performance, both shall work together to find a suitable replacement. And there's no timing on that. That could happen after a month. It could, and it's the superintendent or the mayor. So I can make the determination that the spirit of this MOU, or the spirit of what we agreed on, is not being fulfilled. And you have to trust in my judgment and actually trust the principal's judgment or the assistant principal's judgment to make that determination. But if there's other wording in here. I mean, it's what I said earlier. There's so many protections in here for the board to make sure that it's the right person for the job, whether they perform well after the first year or after the first month or not after the first month. That's why I'm not as concerned with those types of scenarios and types of wording that's being suggested here to tighten this up. I think there's a lot in here that helps us, it helps me make sure I have the right person.
I'm actually saying this not in the current situation. I perfectly agree with you that you would manage the process correctly, but what about in 5 years if we have another superintendent in and perhaps has a different view on the role of the SRO? I think this is not so much operationally as sort of procedurally what makes sense to have in the policy that governs the arrangement rather than what's going to happen in the first year of the program where you're going to be the one managing it. I'm not uncomfortable with that at all. I'm thinking sort of longer term. At some point, we're going to have a new SRO and a new superintendent, and are there any safeguards we need to put in the document to just ensure we get, I know it's a tough situation.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to, please don't, I'm not trying to flip it at all.
Yeah.
But I would think that a new superintendent, if that superintendent wasn't adhering to what we're talking about, frankly, we should get a different superintendent.
Yes, but that's
And maybe that can be made crystal clear to any new superintendent that this is what the board wants with the SRO program. I think you depend a lot on the superintendent or any administrator with the implementation of so many things that have to be done. And again, I don't think you can tighten up the contracts and policies to the point where, but I understand because it's a new program, the board is nervous about it, and I get it.
Okay, I think that's all mine. So, when you talk about, thinking about adding some language or making revisions, is that something we would, I mean, obviously if we approve it now, it's pretty much done, I'm assuming.
If you approve it now, my preference is not to have the problem. But if the board has a different preference, then, you know, again, I'll do my best to.
But he does need some specific guidance on what, just saying, I'm uncomfortable with this, doesn't really tell him what he needs to do. So he could come back with a set of wording and you would say, no, that wasn't quite what I had in mind, or that wasn't at all what I had in mind. We have to give enough direction that the superintendent knows what to put in. And that's why I've been trying to probe on these, not to challenge you,
Yeah.
but just to understand.
So to be clear, I would like to see the minimum training, even if it matches what is currently state law. I would like to see the minimum training in the document, especially since there shouldn't be any argument with that because that's what we're planning to do anyway. And I don't know where to draw the line, but I would say I understand if the SRO sees the commission of a crime, he's a sworn police officer and has to follow certain guidelines. I'm talking about, is there right now a situation that would not be a crime that we perhaps wouldn't call in an SRO, and if the SRO witnessed it and didn't have some document that said, you know, that's not really, he should refer it to the administration. That's what I'm looking for, and I don't know the specifics enough to say exactly where that line should be, but is there, I think it would perhaps address concerns of several of us if we could find a line where we put a thing, and in situations such as this, the SRO will refer the incident to the school disciplinary thing. And he might be involved in the disciplinary process, but I think that's, I don't know, I think that's where Dr. Munson was headed, and I think that would help me feel more comfortable about the process, if there is a line. I mean,
I don't think
there isn't a line.
I don't think I can give you a line. I can look at wording, but I don't think I can give you a line. I don't think I want to give you, to be honest, because I don't think that's the right thing to put in.
What about an acknowledgement that such situations exist that are not criminal, that situations that are not mandatory for the SRO to proceed as a criminal case should be referred to the district's disciplinary? Would that be sufficient?
Perhaps.
That if the SRO doesn't know, he has to pursue them directly?
I know you're looking at me, but oh wait, I had mentioned to the board president I have some comments, but
Okay.
I think it might be more helpful if I hear more. Okay, I get it.
Okay, so those are my suggestions, and I'm interested to hear how other board members.
And just as a reminder, the superintendent has the say on who's hired. So if someone comes in with training that is subpar, if you will, the superintendent can always say, no, that's not one of the criteria we want in the hiring. We want additional training that's not required by law. So I think we have that ability in this contract to impose our own standards. above and beyond what the law requires. It just doesn't define them here.
I'm not asking anything above and beyond what the law requires now. I'm just, I don't see a downside to including some minimum level of training in the document. I'm open to hear an argument for why we wouldn't. It's in the best practices, and I don't see a downside to this contract. Other people agreeing to the contract if it had a minimum level. Or do you see a downside? Can you articulate a downside to having a minimum level of training
I don't.
indicated in the
I don't see
contract?
that.
Okay, so that's my comments.
Mr. Donatelli, your hand earlier?
We're entering this contract with the Borough of Emmaus, and we're talking about times of salary percentages of what this person's getting paid. When you find the right candidate, and I get the impression that you were pretty close to having a candidate lined up,
We've interviewed.
okay, or you had in your budget, you had a proposed $100,000.
Correct.
Is the board going to be privy to that in advance with your decision to discuss? Is this person going to be contracted? Is there a separate contract for this appointment?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yes, with the borough.
With Borough, not with Board.
All right. So how did the economics here jive that we're going to hire this person, that you and the mayor come to an agreement of the salary for this person?
Well, and remember too, the borough police force, I believe, is unionized. So their pay is defined in their contract. It's not subject to negotiation.
So the 42/50 seconds percentage is going to depend on the person's salary. Time.
Okay, so it could be someone that's been only with for 5 years, or it could be someone for 15.
That's correct. So that's correct. There'll be a difference, which is the 100,000 that I put in was estimating that it would be somebody who was a more experienced officer. I believe we're going to be pretty close to that figure.
Okay, so this
And I can let the board know what that figure is. Certainly, that's not a problem.
But this contract is totally nothing to do with that particular person's, other than guidelines. Okay. This is more like an SOP.
Correct. A lot.
Standard operating procedure.
Mr. Miller?
Yes, Mr. Joe. I believe the plain English instruction of paragraph 1A says nothing about SRO certification. It basically says that the services of a full-time, fully certified and trained police officer. So all the certifications for a police officer will be met. But unless there's a state law that defines training specific to the person labeled as a school resource officer, this paragraph does nothing to ensure that the police officer has been trained to SRO, some kind of specific certification for SRO. So I defer to the solicitor, since he said he had comments, to perhaps address this one amongst those comments when he makes his statement.
So I would just comment on it, to act as the SRO. In order to act as an SRO, the law defines what they have to have.
That was going to be my answer.
What law? That would...
State law.
Well, I mean,
I can't give you the chapter and verse.
but there is a defined...
Yeah, to the best of my knowledge, there's special certification you have to act as an SRO. I can't quote you the exact statute.
We had a discussion at LCTI when we were discussing hiring a school police officer. Because LCTI is covered by the state police, not by a local police force. So they cannot have an SRO. State police, for whatever reason, either they will not provide an SRO or they cannot underlie, I don't know which it is. So they had to hire a school police officer, which had a completely different set of standards and regulations and requirements around it. And I remember, of course, that was something that we had at LCTI. Most of the people here did not have the benefit of hearing that presentation and discussion, but I do remember that. Mr. Fisher, I think now is a good time for you to, if you have other comments.
I do, and let me actually take a step back and Dr. Schilder, correct me if I'm wrong, just to help you explain how this final document got you here. I accept your review that there are best practices somewhere. I didn't see all of those, but you say that's what their best practices were. I accept that. I will tell you that most MOUs are perhaps a half a page to a page, and that includes your neighboring school districts that have MOUs. Does that mean they're right or they're wrong? No. But that's the general level of detail that is found in most MOUs. The original draft actually came from Dr. Schilder. He actually did the original draft here. He told from a lot of different MOUs that he had seen and wanted to make sure that there were certain provisions in there that he thought were really important for you as a district to consider, including and most importantly, the right to be involved in the hiring process and the termination process, if you will, of an SRO. You never see that. That's like extremely rare to see that in an agreement. The original draft, in some respects, actually had some more detail than what actually appears here in this final draft. That then got shared with both myself and the borough solicitor, and actually we jointly recommended that we change some of that, or soften some of that language on detail. And there is a reason why, and it actually speaks to Mr. Walker's question. It's extremely important to make sure and understand and acknowledge that the SRO is a borough employee, a borough policeman. He or she is not an East Penn School District employee whatsoever, and we want to make sure that there can be no argument that can be made that he or she will be what's called a joint employee. And what a joint employee is essentially is a creation of the law that says that notwithstanding that you may be being paid by X, your duties and your scope of duties are being controlled by not just X, but X and Y, and therefore you are considered to be an employee of both. And by being considered an employee of both parties then share in all of the potential liabilities should there be something unfortunate or should something go wrong. So it's important to distinguish in there that the SRO is a borough employee. He or she is exclusively, while performing law enforcement duties under the control of the borough and not the school district. We want to completely differentiate those. So that's the first reason why there is no differentiation of duties, that if you come upon this situation, the police officer the SRO will do this, and the school disciplinary authorities will do Y. We want to just completely divorce it. We don't even want to see that in the agreement. Dr. Schilder is also correct in the sense that other than the physical presence of the SRO, nothing will change with respect to whether or not the SRO will charge a student or with a criminal offense. That's always within the borough's police authority's discretion. They decide, not us. The school district can say we want that child charged, or we don't want that child charged. And they can listen to us, they can nod, and they make their own independent determination. Nothing will change under this agreement. Even if the police officer witnesses it, they still have their own independent discretion to decide when to bring charges or when not to bring charges. Nothing's going to change. Just to ensure that was one of your points. Nothing's, other than the fact that they're physically in the building when an incident may happen, nothing is going to change in that regard. With regard to the training, that goes back to the same point. You have to be trained to a certain level, and if the borough says that that's the required training, that's on the borough. We don't have the authority to say you must also get something on top of that, because if we start doing that, we're essentially also assuming the taking the argument that we're also the employer of that police officer, and we don't want to go there. This is for our protection, more than the borough's protection. So that's why the language in there that it simply says it's full-time, fully certified and trained police officer to act as the SRO. We want it, as long as they meet that requirement, that's all we can impose. We can't impose anymore. We don't want to impose anymore. So that's a little bit of the background that went into this and some of the explanation. The language is actually softer for our protection in the end if something goes wrong.
Dr. Munson?
Well, I mean, you're the legal expert, so, you know, I take your understanding of the law as the best advice that this board has.
Can I interrupt you? I apologize. That's actually from the borough solicitor's suggestion.
Okay, well, fair
That's
enough.
actually a joint recommendation.
But here's why that's very troubling to me. We had a year and a half, that sort of analysis or that reasoning is troubling for the purposes of an SRO. We had a year and a half discussion, a robust discussion, about the hiring of an SRO officer. In that discussion, at every step, it was emphasized that this isn't about just stationing a police officer in the district. That an SRO was something different, it was something in addition, and that the debate was not about do we put the police in the schools or not. It was, do we have an SRO, which is an entirely different kind of thing. What you just described now was, well, we can't really do anything but have a MOU that says we're going to have a police officer in the school and nothing else. I mean, it's a sort of bait and switch with the MOU, right? I mean, we should, if we're going to have an SRO, right, we have a binder provided by the administration, you know, that's this thick, on all kinds of information about best practices for SROs. None of that says, well, you should be really, really careful not to say anything that will differentiate your SRO from a regular police officer, right? Quite the contrary. It says the success of SRO programs depend on MOUs that are careful and articulate the differences between the police officer and the SRO. So, you know, I can't question your legal opinion. I mean, that, you know, that sounds reasonable to me. But as a matter of practice for this district, I think we need more.
And this agreement does do a lot more than just say there's a police officer in school. It talks about education, it talks about being part of the community, part of the school. This agreement contemplates the SRO becoming part of the fabric of our community within the school, not just an officer who's stationed here. What I think Mr. Fisher is saying is that we don't want to have language in the MOU that could be interpreted as they are a joint employee of the school district, because then we are fully liable for any liability that might come through the operation of that police officer in the course of his or her duties. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, frankly, the school district has no right, no legal authority to tell the police officer that you can't arrest that child and you can arrest that child. That's law enforcement. Nothing changes there. I only addressed the one issue there.
See, I disagree, Dr. Munson, with your basic premise that you say the success of an SRO program is based on an MOU. I don't think it is. That MOU is important. The success of the program is based on the person who's the SRO. And that's what I keep coming back to. This document enables us as a board and me as a superintendent and the high school principal to pick the person and keep the person in the job that is going to do what we need that person to do, and work with the administration and not go down the path that some of you are concerned about. That to me is the most important part, and that's what's in here. Dr. Buck?
In light of that discussion, perhaps, I'm thinking on page 4, under duties of the SRO, line C has the statement, if an administrator believes an incident violates the law, the administrator will, in appropriate context, the SRO, who shall then determine whether law enforcement action is appropriate. And we have a parallel situation that says if a SRO believes an incident does not violate the law, he should refer as appropriate to the administration to see if disciplinary action is appropriate. So an exact parallel where the administration is saying if they believe the law has been broken, they refer it when appropriate to the SRO. The SRO, if they believe the law has not been broken, so we're not in the situation where a crime is committed and they're required as a police officer to do their police officer duty, just make it clear if there's something that is not a violation of the law, but is something, I mean, they have discretion whether to get involved, just make it clear that it should be, not be treated as a police incident, it should be referred to disciplinary action. It seems like that would make the distinction more clear rather than muddy the distinction.
If I may, I've always instructed the administration here that you're free and independent of what law enforcement chooses to do or not chooses to do. You have the right to impose discipline if you believe your discipline code has been violated, irrespective of whether or not the police charge or do not charge. That is the law. I mean, that is their authority from the get-go. You don't even need, I understand what you're saying.
No.
You don't even need the SRO to come back and say, we're not charging. They have that right anyhow, independent of the MOU.
I'm not talking about the SRO charging, I'm saying to make it clear that, this sort of makes it clear that, actually it gives the administration some discretion, I presume, not to refer something to the SRO, even though it may be a criminal case, but to make it clear that if it's not a criminal case, to make it clear that the SRO doesn't make a decision on whether it's disciplinary, they refer it to the administration disciplinary process.
That can be clarified. I think that's already very clear, to be honest with you. And I think it's something that we already practice. But to me, it's a given. What you just said is a given and understood. You can take a look at that word.
Yeah, I don't mean to disagree with you. That is what it is always, has been the practice, is always the practice, is the authority, and always is the authority. If that's what you feel comfortable with putting that sentence here, I can't imagine a problem with that, because that's already the authority.
And it seems like that might give some board members comfort that there is a clear break, that a clear way of defining that disciplinary action, although it says he's not the disciplinarian for the school, it makes it clear that if it's not a legal authority, where a legal situation where he has to take action by law, that he refers it to the school disciplinary process.
Like I said, I can't imagine a problem with that.
Okay, does that satisfy your concerns, Dr. Munson? Somewhat?
I mean, to some extent, I mean, I would just go back to the fact that I'm not an expert in any of this. I don't think most of us are, some of you might be. So I go to documents like best practices, and I say, we were provided with a document that provides 12 best practices for MOUs. Let's use them. And that's sort of my feeling. Of course, a law enforcement officer, we can't change the law for their discretion from an MOU, but the whole purpose of, in the title itself is implied, the whole point of an MOU is to make explicit, right, what the understanding is of the different parties, so that it is clear that both the district and for the benefit of the SRO understand when the law enforcement officer is going to use their discretion and when they're not, right? That's why you have MOUs.
I think Mr. Fisher made clear that we cannot dictate to the police when he or she will use their discretion.
That's right, and that's why we use an MOU.
Well, we can't. We cannot. We cannot.
Legal matters, criminal matters, we can't.
We cannot, no, we cannot dictate to the police what they will do from a law enforcement perspective, or how they.
We're not talking about law enforcement now, we're talking about disciplinary action.
Well, let me ask this question. Who can refer a student right now for disciplinary consideration within the high school?
The administration.
And And teachers, I assume,
You said, what was it, your
can
word
refer a
recommend?
student for disciplinary
They can
action.
refer, but they don't, the teachers don't determine what that disciplinary action is.
So I think what I'm hearing is that, well, if I'm interpreting it correctly, Dr. Bacher wants a line in the policy that specifically says the SRO can refer a student to the administration for consideration for
No,
discipline.
no, I wanted that they must refer to disciplinary, perhaps. If we're saying that that is what will happen anyway, that the SRO will not be the disciplinarian, will not initiate, they might be a part of the disciplinary discussion, but they will not initiate disciplinary action on their own.
They can't. They cannot. They have no authority under the law to initiate school discipline. They can only initiate legal sanction, arresting or not arresting someone. So if the SRO is in the hall and sees a student who's late to class, what you're saying is that the requirement is, that's not a law that's being broken, but it's a disciplinary infraction. Therefore, the SRO must report that student to the administration for consideration of whether discipline should be enforced. I completely oppose that. Because if you look at our, they've got their cell phone out in the hall. The police officer said, I saw.
Actually, my original comment was that similar language to what's in there. They may, I just want to make sure that there can be late to class is an extreme example. There are things that, I was more targeted at things that are not clearly criminal, but perhaps could be, I don't know, are on
Do you
the
have an
edge.
example? I'm struggling to come up with any examples.
Can I use an analogy? Get pulled over for speeding and the cop has the right to let you go or give you a ticket. Is that what you're
No,
saying?
he's still, anything
That's
of a
infraction.
criminal infraction,
But you-
they have discretion, but
You could, the SRO has the, doesn't necessarily have to arrest this person. He feels that he wants to let him off with a warning.
Oh, absolutely. So if a student is committing what would normally come under disorderly conduct, the police officer has complete discretion on whether to charge the student or not. But I don't think that's what
no, that's not what
Dr. Bacher is saying. He's not talking about crimes. I can't think of any instances except these things that are covered by our school discipline policy. And I don't want the SRO being looked at as, oh, he's another hall monitor.
No, I'm
She's
not
a
saying
hall
that, I take that back about that they'd be forced to. I'm just thinking about ways to make a distinction of that we're not asking them, to make it more clear that we're not asking them to initiate disciplinary processes directly. Like, for example, I see an infraction, I'm gonna take the kid to this principal right now, that they would refer the incident to the disciplinary procedure rather than initiating disciplinary procedure by taking the kid to the principal right away.
I think page 4, section 2, item lines or paragraph C is crystal clear in that regard. I don't think I can read it any other way. The
I think
SRO
there's a
is not
difference
to be used in the
between-
role of school disciplinary.
I just think that that's supplanting the school disciplinarian. I think there is a gap between what we're talking about, initiating the procedure.
And I'm struggling to come up with any examples in my mind where this would apply. I can't
So
think of
what
one.
if they see a serious infraction of school rules, and I'm thinking off the top of my head now, but something that would be handled definitely under our disciplinary system, but, for example, dragging the kid to the principal's office or something like that would be a situation where we saw videos of it. I don't think that's going to happen, but the SRO is called to a classroom and witnesses someone being obstinate, and decides, I'm going to forcibly take this person to the principal's office to address this disciplinary nature. I think something like that would say, no, the SRO isn't dragging someone to the principal's office to initiate a disciplinary action. The SRO is going to refer the action to our principals, and they're going to decide how to address the disciplinary action.
Let me ask this, will a teacher be able to call on the SRO, or will it have to go through an administrator?
We'll have to go through the administrator.
What if the SRO is walking down the hallway and sees something going on like that?
Sees a student being obstinate and decides to interject into the situation? Clear violation of letter C.
I don't believe so. I don't believe that taking someone to the principal's office for discipline is different than being the disciplinarian.
I don't think you can write an MOU that's going to cover all those situations.
I'm not,
I really don't. I think we're,
If you have some
Think you're
suggestion
micromanaging.
language,
I did have.
I can't come up with anything.
I did have suggestion of language, and it was parallel to the sentence that's in there, but with the SRO, beliefs an incident is not a violation of law, that they will refer it to the school disciplinary action, the school disciplinary system.
And again, I'll
It
just
is exactly
I'll just state
appropriate.
my opposition to it. The school resource officer should not be involved in initiating any kind of school discipline.
Exactly.
things. And that would include referring it to the administration. That's not the role of a school resource, in my opinion.
no, it's not, and I'm,
I would say it's the exact same language here. When appropriate, the SRO will, when appropriate, refer the situation to the school disciplinary.
you're trying to prevent something that, you use the
Probably not.
example of something that happened in the meeting. You're trying to prevent that from happening by putting wording in an MOU. I don't think you can prevent that from happening, I don't care what the wording is.
You're saying
Because
you can do
the
it-
individual decided to do it, the teacher decided to refer it, the SRO decided to take advantage or, to respond, all of it inappropriately.
Yeah.
And I don't think an MOU is going to ever prevent that.
I think
If you have the wrong person in the SRO position who's going to react that way, the MOU is not going to help you.
Although I
You need to
think
get the person
the
out of
point-
that job.
I agree that's the fundamental solution, but isn't the point of the MRU to make some of these guidelines more clear? And I think having that in the MOU might make it more clear that that's not the appropriate reaction to the situation. I think that's why it's the best practice. I think it's trying to address situations, not situation by situation, anything that could occur, but in a global sense to make it clear, this is the responsibilities, these are not the responsibilities. I don't know, I guess I'll defer to other people on the board, but I'm leaning towards wanting to see some language like that. I understand now that the minimum requirements, I understand the reasons for not having them. I guess I think Dr. Munson explained it very well when he said, and it was hard for me to verbalize it, this was my expectation on all the discussion leading up to this point, is that the MOU would define these types of things. And I couldn't really verbalize it, but I don't think it defines the things as clearly. And I've even said this to other people when discussing it, that, oh, that's the importance of the MOU, that's what we've been discussing. The importance of the MOU is to make certain boundaries clear. And I just don't see that really at all in here. Not at all. I just don't see that. Yes, there's a general statement that he's not the school disciplinarian, but I think it's more about what falls under. that's something that we've discussed, is very important in the MOU to state clearly what falls under the purview of the SRO and what doesn't. And other than saying if it's criminal in nature, it clearly falls under his purview, it doesn't really say anything about what doesn't fall under his purview at all. Other than he's not the disciplinarian, but that's different than what we're talking about. So that's my opinion. I guess I don't want to belabor this anymore, but
Let me again suggest most strongly that if board members can quantify exactly what their concerns are, that we back that up with a procedure, just as we do with policy. Using case in point, the student disciplinary code, the policy talks about discipline, but the discipline code that we have specifies, what actions are subject to a suspension, to a detention. That's where the details lie. I don't see the need to put anything more into the MOU. But if you have concerns and can quantify them and spell them out, I would ask the administration to put together procedures to back up the MOU.
You don't have the floor yet.
And let me ask our solicitor. We're sitting here facing a vote. What happens if this motion fails?
Approve the MOU and
Yeah, maybe we can
go back and retry it, something else.
It could be introduced on a future agenda and then do the same merger for
Or you can table it.
But if we table, it will come back in the same form. So if we're going to change it, my preference would be to withdraw the motion and reintroduce it in a different form, if that's what the answer is.
But I don't know that we have sufficient direction to change the MOU.
I don't think we do either.
Then that's why I'm saying the procedure, let's pass this tonight and then come up with the rules that back it up.
Mr. Fisher, does that work?
I don't think so. I understand exactly what you're suggesting, but this is an agreement between two different agencies here. I don't think you can put separate
You
procedures.
can't have administrative regs.
Yeah,
There
I don't
aren't
think
regs
you can
now.
have it.
There'd be too many.
You can't constrain the SRO
I can't.
with our procedures. Because then it would.
Because they're not your procedures, they're both. So I think it has to come in this, something has to be done in an agreement.
No, that's what I was going to say. I think if we're talking about putting limits on the SRO actions or defining the SRO's possibility, if they were in our procedures, it would look like the SRO is our employee, and we probably would not want to have that situation. Anything that we're going to constrain the SRO's actions has to be in the MOU.
Some discussion on the motion? Mr. Chambers?
I just have some other comments. I would echo the points of Dr. Munson. There are best practices, and we have seen them. And I know that I was not involved in initial discussions. I would think that we should really take a hard look at those again and determine how they should be incorporated or not incorporated. My specific question, though, was this SRO will be stationed at the high school, and throughout the document, it talks about a principal. And it doesn't in any way say where that principal resides, if that principal at the high school or the high school. And is it our intention that the principal could be any principal? That would be involved in any of the actions that are contemplated in the MOU. I thought that this individual was focused on the high school, and I think it would be helpful if it was specifically looked at as a principal of the high school. I couldn't tell what when this document was written. It talks about the district, it talks about the East Penn, other buildings, it talks about the high school, but I assume that the principal is the principal of the high school, and that was our intent. And I also think that there is a reporting requirement that is on page 6 of the MOU, that the SRO will maintain detailed and accurate records related to his activity. That's great, but I think he should be reporting that information to the superintendent on a timely basis. It's a weekly summary, it's a monthly report, and there needs to be some feedback as to what he's doing and why he's doing it, and then it needs to be filtered up, especially when these programs are just getting started. I just think that is not a sufficient enough feedback loop for someone in this position, and not knowing what he is actually doing. He's not being monitored 24/7. And I think that the information needs to flow back up the chain to the administration and the principal. So those are just some other comments that I have. I had one nit, I don't know if it's appropriate nit, on page 3, the top, it says, until an SRO is agreed upon for kids' actions. I think that should be his or her, as we had looked at some of these other ones. Thank you.
A couple of comments, if I may, Mr. Champagne. The intention of this clearly is that the SRO is stationed at the high school. Language under the first few whereases does talk about other schools within the borough. And both the board solicitor and I talked about that and agreed that that actually, I prefer that. We prefer that. It gives us a little bit of latitude. But it is clear, we think it's clear throughout the agreement that the SRO is stationed at the high school. So there's some latitude. If the SRO was needed at one of the other 2 borough schools, could be utilized there. In terms of the reporting, with all due respect, I very much disagree with you. I do not think there should be any level of reporting beyond this to the superintendent, again, for some of the reasons that Mr. Fisher brought up, but I don't think it's necessary in terms of the records and the documentation on a weekly basis to the superintendent or principal. I don't think that's appropriate.
I respectfully disagree.
All right, so I have a couple of comments.
Mr. Armstrong, can I ask one last question?
After I have a chance, yeah, sure. No, I haven't had a chance to weigh in except in response to things other people said. I apologize. So that's all right. This agreement, I think, is quite strong agreement. I think it gives us all the protections that we need, and I think it covers, you obviously disagree, but I think it covers in crystal clear language what the SRO will do and what the SRO is not to do, which is a function in a disciplinary fashion. I feel that the agreement is both flexible enough to give us what we need in terms of control over the selection of the individual who would fill this role, as well as dismissing, which is stunning that we have the ability to with the mayor to determine that a change is necessary. But it's amazing that the borough has ceded to us that role in this process. I think it gives us a lot more flexibility than virtually any other school. I've also heard the term batted about today, best practices. I don't believe in best practices. I believe there are good practices. I believe there are better practices. But I also believe that practices out of context cannot be considered best. So if we say these are the best practices for an SRO, it applies in an urban school, a suburban school, a rural school, an elementary school, a high school, a middle school. There cannot be one set of best practices that is best in all those situations. I just don't believe that that is possible. Just like I don't believe there's one set of best practices for administering your IT department, for administering human resources, for administering your accounting function, for administering your monthly financial reports. There are good practices. There are practices that are better fit in one school district or another school district or a different kind of organization. But to say there is a set of best practices that apply in all circumstances and should all be incorporated, I don't believe that is on the face of it, can be supported logically in any way. I believe that we should consider all of those points and consider whether they belong in this. I believe that Dr. Schilder has done a fantastic job of looking at many different agreements and bringing in the elements of it that he felt were necessary. And Mr. Fisher's explanation that he and the borough solicitor removed some of those specific things in order to strengthen the protections of the school district, I think that's exactly what we hire a solicitor to do, is to protect our interests. And I think I'm completely comfortable with approving this and moving forward at this time. Further comments, Mr. Valentine?
Dr. Schulter, we're focusing on this MOU, but do you have something implemented for the administration, for the school teachers, to set guidelines that they are to follow? That says, you don't call this guy to do this, this, and this. This is what you are haggard to handle certain incidents, and anything above and beyond, this is where the SRO comes in. Is there anything like that being implemented?
Yes, we plan on educating the staff. Once the SRO MOU is in place, we will share the MOU with the staff, discussing all types of things. Do I have an actual written document that says guidelines? No, I don't. Yeah, candidly. But the intent was to take this MOU and then, if you will, train the teachers as to what the expectations are. Thank you.
Any comments? Dr. West?
Just one last thing, I think I started with this. I just want to say that, I am perfectly prepared to approve an MOU, but I am not a paper this.
Any further comments? Ms. Allen?
Dr. Schilder, I was just wondering, when you mentioned about training for the teachers, when would that happen? Would it be their development days that they have? When do
The opening week of school, which is the 22nd, 23rd, 24th, we have teachers here without students.
Right.
That's our opportunity to train.
Any other discussion on the motion? Mrs. Allen, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Donatelli?
Aye.
Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Ms. Allen?
Aye.
Mr. Champagne?
No.
Ms. Fuller?
Aye.
Dr. Munson?
No.
Dr. Bacher?
No,
Mr. Earnshaw?
Aye.
5 ayes, 3 nays.
Motion carries. Next, we have item 8, curriculum. May I have a motion, please?
second.
Discussion on the motion?